Welcome back to another episode of the Blockchain Report, and we've got a lot in store for you today. We've got Epstein's inbox dragging Trump back into the headlines, a government shutdown so long even Congress forgot how to government, and China accusing the U.S. of pulling off a $4 billion Bitcoin hack because apparently international cyber theft is the new diplomacy. And that's just the warm-up. We've got plenty of more madness to unpack in today's show, so get excited for that. But let's start at the top, shall we, with this morning's bull run. Run the stinger. Let's get into it, boys. All righty, well, Jeffrey Epstein, you remember him. Well, he might be dead, but his inbox is still making headlines. House Democrats have released emails showing that Epstein once claimed Donald Trump spent hours at my house with one of his victims because apparently Gmail has a longer memory than most politicians. Epstein allegedly wrote that Trump knew about the girls, which is never a sentence you want showing up in your search history. Trump, for his part, says he had nothing to do with Epstein's crimes and that their friendship ended years ago after some sort of Palm Beach real estate beef. You know, the kind of argument billionaires have right before one of them goes to prison. The emails were part of thousands of pages turned over to the House Oversight Committee, which immediately decided to leak the three juiciest ones because Washington may hate Epstein, but it loves drama. One message had Epstein writing to Ghislaine Maxwell that, quote, "That dog that hasn't barked is Trump," saying a victim spent hours at his house with him but had never once been mentioned. Apparently,
you are
even
fake
Epstein
news.
was surprised. Hey, get out of here, Donald. Even Epstein was surprised Trump hadn't become a subplot in his scandals yet. Another email from 2019 to author Michael Wolff claimed of course he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. If you're emailing Michael Wolff for advice on damage control, well, you've officially hit the end credits of your reputation. Democrats are now pushing a measure to force the Trump administration to release all its Epstein-related documents, while Trump calls the entire thing a hoax. And
you are
insists that he
fake
kicked
news.
Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago long before the crimes came to light. And joining us today to make sense of this story and many others, we have the man himself, Nolan Bowerly, joining us. Nolan, how are you this morning? Thanks for joining us. Happy Epstein Email Files Day. How are you?
I love life. Who could complain? Things are going great. We're excited.
Things
So
are great.
Epstein, look, the lesson I think Epstein should teach everyone in Bitcoin, outside of Bitcoin, anyone who's interested in this, is blackmail is the operating system. What we've understood for a long time is, you know how we make fun of politicians for doing stupid things? It's like, how could someone be that dumb? Right? I don't understand. This is not what they said, not what they promised. It's always the same story.
Yeah.
The actual amount of blackmail going on would probably shock most people. It's probably most decisions that are being run through a blackmailocracy. We exist and we live in what, people have been deluded into thinking is a type of democracy. It's not. It's blackmailocracy and has been probably longer than most of us realize. Now, I believe that when you look at the last 4 years of the Biden administration, there's a lot to answer for there as well. Why didn't they put any of this stuff out on Trump before? What do we really know? From what I see from Trump, the wink wink and the way he's handling it so pathetically shows what the truth is, shows that he's maybe not even capable of describing what's in them. Whether it involves him, I doubt. I think it does speak to a lot of foreign people that are being protected, a lot of foreign governments being protected. But still, the number one smoking gun in any of this case that no one wants to address is related exactly to what Bitcoiners see and Bitcoiners understand, which is the banking relationships that JP Morgan had. If you remember, back in Christmas 2023, Joe Biden flew on Christmas holidays on an impromptu, unannounced, unplanned trip to the American Virgin Islands, whereupon the Attorney General of the American Virgin Islands, who had just begun proceedings holding Jeffrey Epstein accountable, Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan accountable for the money laundering aspects of the Epstein blackmailocracy that they ran. And so when he ran that, when that thing happened, she got fired. And Legacy News never talked about this. So imagine the US president went on a vacation to the American Virgin Islands, whereupon the Attorney General was forced to step down. Joe Biden met with the, I don't know what you call them, governor, prime minister, whatever is going on in the Virgin Islands, met with that leader. Attorney General was gone the next day, and this was all before New Year's Eve in that weird little news desert you get between Christmas and New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
So it never got the attention it deserved. But the operating system is blackmailocracy. The banks are involved. Everybody knows what's going on here, and it's as bad as it looks. We exist in a blackmail system, and how much Trump can do about it, I don't know. He's known about it for a long time, and I think that's even one of the shocking things, like to take it right to how long some of these secrets have been hidden. The story of the JFK assassination, for example, right? It looks like most people who were involved knew exactly what was going on for a long time, and that it was such a mystery for people for 40, 50, 60 years really speaks to how powerful this blackmail system really is. How you can have the truth right in front of you and no one will see it. When I look at Trump, to me, I see a hostage. I see someone who is just not able, for whatever reason, to tell the truth. I don't think it's just not his style to be involved in that stuff, let's say. He did let us know in the Billy Bush Sunday interview that he's aware of how to get girls. There's skills he has that
He's a ladies' man.
he's a ladies' man. So the blackmail aspect of this, I think, when you try to understand and you wonder, well, why are politicians so dumb? Well, not all of them are free to express their actual convictions. Only the Fettermans, I guess. You have to have a stroke and then have your entire hardware rebooted and your firmware changed for you to sort of speak the truth. So, Fetterman 2028.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think a blackmailocracy sounds about right. I have seen House of Cards. I've got some idea how it works. And I got a feeling there's at least a couple prominent politicians up there that have Vladimir Putin's hand up their backside being controlled like a little doll. I don't want to say which ones, but I've got some feelings in this. And this Epstein thing comes out at what I feel like it's kind of an interesting time, right? There's a lot of things going on specifically with the government shutdown. And part of me wonders, is this more DC drama that's meant to keep the public distracted on one thing while something else is happening in the shadows? Because we've seen that move before. Or do you think this is really genuine accountability finally catching up to people involved in this Epstein case? What are your thoughts on that, Nolan?
Hard to say. Trump is, again, a master of kayfabe. And the last time he was presented with this Epstein story, it created this entire wrestling optics between Elon Musk. I think we were talking about this yesterday. Elon Musk and Trump, when they got into the original fight, Trump is in the Epstein files. If you remember what that caused, right? We can lecture people all day about the Federal Reserve and the national debt, but nobody listens. But if you wrap it up in wrestling drama, Elon and Trump fighting, there has never been such a widespread discussion about the appropriateness of Fed debt. You've never seen End the Fed trend the way you saw End the Fed trend when Epstein came up in the context of the kayfabe between Trump and Musk. Now, Musk has come afterward and said, no, of course, there's nothing really there. His name is mentioned in the same ways that you're mentioning right now. It's not that there's any smoking gun evidence. It did exactly what we all assumed was the truth at the time, or at least I assumed and said on my show, The Great Awakening, that we were watching a kayfabe fight that is somewhat real. Wrestling is not totally fake in that there's sometimes beef between people, rivalries between people. There is some form of conflict, but when you understand that it's better to have the conflict in front of people because it will actually advance your purposes, which I think both Trump and Elon Musk are great at doing. These are two of the greatest marketers in the world, and they wouldn't let a great opportunity for marketing about something they both sort of agreed about, the size of the debt and the existential threat that it poses to America. So you got to see with the Epstein a funnel into the Federal Reserve conversation. And I think right now you've got a very similar aspect going. Trump's having a ton of trouble with his base because of the H-1B issue. Now, the good thing that we see from the type of power that Trump has, Trump is a populist. His power comes from the bottom up. And if you saw, I played a video today from Rush Limbaugh, which explained that only Trump can ruin his relationship with his fans or supporters. That it can't be done by the legacy news, it can't be done by Congress, it can't be done by revelations, but Trump himself can do it. And when Trump does something that his base doesn't like, they react instantly. And it's unlike most bases that you'll see in political movements. Most of them, as of yesterday, I mean, if you look at Rasmussen, the hate is real. I mean, people are furious with Trump today, much more about the H-1Bs, about the Epstein stuff. They're absolutely furious today. So now in Bitcoin, we're used to this kind of thing. Bitcoin has a sort of antithesis towards leadership, especially leaders that divert attention, right? We don't like attention hogs. We don't like people that can do magic tricks and scam you. And so Bitcoiners are ready to always criticize leaders. It's sort of a slay your heroes movement to begin with. So watching MAGA deal with something that Bitcoiners are already aware of and know how to engage in and perform is probably a good thing. Now, Trump can win them back, right? If he goes and does what he promised they would do, they would turn around right away. But there is no antipathy, there is no avoidance of conflict. That's sort of a old world legacy political way of doing things. I can't criticize George Bush Jr. because I'm a Republican. The homerism and the team game thing doesn't really apply. Most of Trump's fans were fair weather. They weren't lifelong Republicans. They were people who Trump sold them on a bill of goods. And if he doesn't deliver, they ought to turn on him right away. So he's got a lot of pressure now to come through on these things. And if he doesn't, then people will roll the dice on someone else who does. It just shows you that politics are moving to exactly what I think a lot of Bitcoiners would recognize, not Republican and Democrat any longer, much more like communism versus populism, nationalism infused with Bitcoin, individual sovereignty versus a collective movement. So individuality versus a preservation of institutions. So that's the fight. Bitcoiners recognize it, and Trump fumbling the ball with MAGA right now really in line with how Bitcoiners see the future playing out anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that's happening right now for sure, and I'm kind of more surprised that Republicans aren't more upset about this. I would have figured sex trafficking is something we can all get behind and agree on is not okay, and we could reach across the aisle and shake our neighbor's hand and say we both agree that this is messed up. But apparently it's not. They have more problems with the visa, so is what it is. But
I would add one point to that, which is that
yes.
Republicans have such little faith in legacy media and anything coming out of any institution that has Democrats in it. And they'll just say very simply, and it's a very good point, one that I agree with, which is you had 4 years where you made up stuff, you raided Trump's house, you arrested him on anything. Why didn't you take those 4 years to come up with this? So there's no way there's no way Republicans will ever, or MAGA people will ever find anything coming out of these folks, even a little bit credible or interesting, just because of the history of the abuse of those institutions, the abuse of, I mean, just the Russia thing, that it went on for 4 years when it was really just a deep state operation, and it was really just the misuse of courts, the misuse of different apparatuses that were supposed to be there to, not be so corrupt. So when to actually, it should be a big deal when the government spies on senators. It should be a big deal when the government spies on a presidential campaign. So most of those institutions have lost credibility. So it's just that they can't connect with the MAGA folks because they already don't listen to them. Both groups exist in bubbles, Republicans, Democrats. They exist in their own bubbles. The difference is Republicans can fight inside of their bubble to a greater degree than Democrats. There is a lot more harmony within the bubble versus so most Republicans figure they're going to hear about the criticism anyway. If it doesn't penetrate from the bottom up, it won't make it to Trump. Right now, what he's hearing from the
Yeah.
bottom up is, you scammed us on the H-1B. Why aren't you, January 6th people were arrested at, hundreds of people arrested. Why aren't any of these Antifa people getting arrested if they go around punching people in the face at Berkeley yesterday? So they're more concerned about their
Yeah.
own personal safety, especially after Charlie Kirk.
Yeah. Well, I will say I'm at least proud of our government for reaching across the aisle. I'm actually more surprised than anything, and we're finally seemingly ending this government shutdown. And I want to talk about this here in a sec, so hang 10, Nolan. We'll be back with you to chat in just a second. Because after 40 days, over 40 days of chaos and finger pointing, the U.S. government is finally on the road to reopening. The House is expected to vote and pass on a bill today that would then be sent to the President Trump's desk to sign. Now, the Senate passed that bill on Monday night to fund parts of the government covering military construction, Veterans Affairs, and the Department of Agriculture, and even the legislative branch itself. So, yes, they had to pass a bill to pay themselves. Everything else gets temporary funding through January 30th, which means we'll be doing this again in just a few months, so don't get too comfortable. The bill passed 60 to 40 after 8 Democrats joined Republicans in voting. Yes, a rare show of bipartisanship, or as it's known in Washington, a moment of collective desperation. President Trump says he'll abide by the deal once it reaches his desk, which, given his record, is like saying a cat abides by not knocking things off of counters. Now, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries wasn't impressed. He called the resolution a 7-week Republican taxpayer-funded vacation, which is both accurate and probably going on a campaign t-shirt somewhere. Democrats wanted to use the shutdown to force an extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits, but the final bill says nothing about that. Instead, Republicans agreed to hold a vote on extending those subsidies in December. So great news for anyone who wanted their health care to depend on a holiday miracle. Meanwhile, the agreement also reverses layoffs made by the Trump administration during the shutdown, meaning everyone Trump tried to fire gets their job back. It's the first time Washington has ever passed a reverse you're fired clause. So if you got furloughed, congratulations, you've been rehired retroactively. That should make for a fun conversation with payroll. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, after 42 long days, the government seems to finally be reopening. Is this progress, or are we just pressing snooze on the next political meltdown? Because that's kind of what it feels like. What do you think?
Yeah, and it feels like America is recalibrating at the federal level. I've long believed that the architecture, let's say that the way the federal government is built, really relates to this last economic cycle that we went through with fiat currency, with the US dollar being used really to fund government perpetually, right? We've seen the illogic of how much money printing has gone on, all of that issued by government bonds, and then the Federal Reserve is able to buy the bonds and then fund the government through this mousetrap that has never really had legs to be able to continue. We've understood for a long time, in Bitcoin anyway, that type of corruption, the collateralization of birth certificates, really, and that's what it is, right? However, the debt ceiling was always a function of the population and how much debt each individual is able to assume. That's why a lot of the immigration was so cherished by both Democrats and Republicans, because it was a way of manipulating the debt ceiling without actually having to go to Congress. If you have more people, then you're able to actually borrow more money, because it really was by head. The debt ceiling was related to the amount of debt per birth certificate per U.S. citizen or U.S. immigrant. So immigration was a way for the government to borrow more money at the stroke of a pen, right? Just new people means not even the stroke of a pen, just statutorily. They don't have to ask for it. So only when they got up to not having enough new people, not enough new Social Security numbers issued in a year, did they have to go and ask Congress for the debt ceiling to be raised. So this has a lot to do with the appropriate size of the federal government. What is the right size? It looks like it's got to be a lot smaller, and it's a very painful thing to do, and there hasn't been much of a desire or appetite to do it. And we are running out of runway to have the luxury of even choosing that. And again, America is 50 states. America was a decentralized model in the first place. And while you've got all of this stuff going on in Washington, you've got a lot going on in Florida, for example. You've got the governor there talking about getting, the debt per Florida person. I think they've paid off almost all of their state debt. I think it's like $20 a Floridian at this point for the state level debt, almost nothing. And you're seeing them embrace the end of property taxes and other things like that. So when you see that it's the federal government that has all of this debt, it's not the United States in general. It is the US federal government, everything that is Washington, D.C., that's carrying that huge debt. And to say that it's Americans who hold it and individually, not exactly true, right? So there are many ways out of this, and debasement is one of them. And so the size and scale of the federal government, I often think of, America won World War II. But in many ways, Americans lost. In the end, they got all of this government spending. They became huge consumers. That was a conscious decision made by Edward Bernays in the 1950s, along with Eisenhower, where Eisenhower was not convinced of the military missile gap, not convinced of Russian power or Soviet power, but nevertheless wanted to keep a strong war footing, and he used Sigmund Freud's nephew. So I don't know if you know this story, but Sigmund Freud's nephew he's really the person responsible, for example, women smoking cigarettes. Cigarettes were designed, the et part obviously designed for female consumption at the turn of the century, still hadn't really taken off into the 1920s. So they got this guy, Edward Bernays, involved. And Edward Bernays said, well, it's really a function of the women thinking it's licentious and kind of, it made them look loose. It made them look bad morals. So Edward Bernays created a publicity stunt where on July 4th, he got all the media in New York City to sit on Fifth Avenue for the July 4th parade and said, you will see women light lamps of liberty. And the women all came there and the news was there and they were ready to take pictures and they all lit up a smoke. And once he associated cigarette smoking with freedom, it caught on overnight. And cigarettes obviously haven't looked back. So Bernays became, maybe it was the right choice, I don't know. But in the 1950s, instead of having America keep making bombs and weapons and all this kind of stuff, Bernays convinced the Eisenhower that what you should do is convince Americans to be consumers. Washing machines, dishwashers, second cars. He figured out how to sell American their second car. It wasn't a cheap car. They tried that. It was luxury cars, sports cars for men. And then the second car would be passed on to the wife, and then it did induce second car buying. So now go back to that time. How did Americans end up, right? They won World War II, and then they get fed Sigmund Freud's nephew, who hijacks their brains and turns them into consumers. Again, probably the right choice, right? Better than sitting on a war footing for the entire 1950s. This would allow the washing machine maker to go make the tanks again if anything did happen. So I've used the frame for a long time that if we are in World War III, I think World War III is a psychological and economic war. And it comes back to a lot of these issues of consumption and why do we consume and will it ever fill the hole in your heart? And it won't. I mean, look at Americans. They've become fatter, stupider. I don't want to fat shame. That's not the point of saying it, but it's the reality. Americans have no, they don't even know. We can stupid shame. That's fine. Yeah. No one thinks they're stupid. That's why. So yeah, it's a little less objective. But you're seeing it. I mean, that is the answer to a lot of these problems, right? I think existentially, Americans realize that they don't want to consume this way anymore. They want to eat simple. They want to be disciplined internally. They want to go back to saving money. If anyone gave you advice to save money since America won World War II, they were stupid, right? You should never have saved money. You should have gone into mega debt and invested it all in the market, which is a crazy way to run your society. So in many ways, America and the institutions winning World War II left Americans the losers. They were the people who bore this burden. I don't want to make it sound like America's just been losing for the past 80 years. There was a lot of benefit they got out of printing the money, so it's not that simple. But here we are in World War III, and we see these institutions, and we see things like the federal government. In many ways, the federal government failing, the federal government not doing a good job is an avenue towards Americans actually winning, not getting our benefits from government work, doing it because no one else is going to help us. We have to do this ourselves. It's much more in line with the future that Bitcoiners want to create. And functionally, It's what I believed from the very beginning. Before I could have seen what Trump had going well for him as a candidate in 2015, the benefit of Trump winning was that it was going to take the presidency down a notch, no matter how you added it up. He was going to be a TV star explicitly. Now, some people said Obama was a TV president to begin with, and that he was much more television oriented than results driven anyway, that much of it was a media campaign and a media projection. Trump just made that explicit about the presidency. There's no reason why the US president needs to be the leader of the free world. The job could be done in many other ways. In an old era, maybe it made sense, but no longer in the future does it make sense for the president to be the leader of all of this stuff and have all of these responsibilities, because it's a made-up job. It's powers that were inherited. It was not what was designed for the job of the presidency. No one said George Washington was the leader of the free world when he was president, yet he was a great president. So we have a situation, and Joe Biden further solidified that, right? Trump, even if he didn't have skills to persuade and do this, which are his best skills, he still would have had a positive effect on the calibration, orientation, the way the federal government works, in the same way that Joe Biden did. He was so distasteful to many people that no one believed he was the leader of the free world. I mean, the whole thing was absurd. How could he be the leader of the free world? He can't lick ice cream. I mean, it was not possible. So Trump coming back here for the third time, in some ways, is either it's rejected outright, the job of the presidency, as something that could fix America, which might be good for Americans, right? We're in charge of our own destiny here, and Americans have to finally learn the lesson that their freedom is not, in the same way that Protestants once had to learn that access to God doesn't have to go through the Catholic Church. And that's what the separation of church and state taught us all those years ago. We might be getting to the point where we understand, at least economically, that the pathway to economic freedom does not have to go through the presidency, and that the separation of money and state puts the agency and the route you need to take right in front of you, and you don't need to wait on the president to pass a law before you embrace what will make you free and prosperous.
Well, I'll tell you what, Nolan, I've never felt like more of an American loser after hearing you talk about that. I think I need to go fire up a lamp of liberty behind the building and think about things for a while, which is also a great name. I don't know how there aren't cigarettes called lamps of liberty. Those things would fly off the shelves.
I would buy a lamp of liberty. I would.
You think? Right? It sounds classy.
Yeah, lamps of liberty. That's what they were.
I'm here for it. I might have a new business venture after this, but we'll see. I'm not really smart right now, so that doesn't help. But something that would make me feel a little bit better as a winner is I want to talk about this next story where allegedly China and the US have found a new place to argue, and that's regarding a 4-year-old Bitcoin hack worth about $4 billion. So the saga starts with Lubian, a Chinese Bitcoin mining pool that was hacked in 2020, losing over 127,000 Bitcoin from wallets belonging to Chen Zi of Cambodia's Prince Group. Now, hackers exploited a weak 32-bit pseudo-random key generator, letting them brute force thousands of private keys and drain more than 90% of Lubian's holdings in just hours. Now, for years, the stolen coins sat untouched while Lubian and Chen sent over 1,000 messages begging the hacker to return the funds and offering a ransom. Now, nothing moved until June of last year when blockchain analysts noticed about 127,000 Bitcoin flowing from those dormant wallets into new addresses. Arkham Intelligence later tagged those new addresses as belonging to the US government, months before the Department of Justice finally announced that it had seized 127,000 BTC and charged Chen in October of this year. Now, Chinese commenters quickly noted that the amounts and addresses line up with the 2020 Lubian hack, suggesting US authorities may have quietly gained access to the private keys well before going public. Now, the DOJ has offered no technical explanation, saying only that the assets were linked to illicit operations and laundered through mining operations in China and Iran, while on-chain data appears to show the coins coming directly from Lubian's compromised wallets. Now, since the seizure announcement, Lubian-linked wallets have started moving again. One shifted 11,000 Bitcoin, that's near $1.3 billion, and another 15,000 BTC, which is around 1.8 billion. Now, analysts are unsure if those transfers represent survivors scrambling to protect remaining funds or other actors entangled in the same network of addresses. So while China frames this as secret U.S. cyber warfare and Washington calls it standard justice, the real message is that sovereigns are quietly turning themselves into some of the largest, least voluntary hodlers on the planet. We're bringing Nolan back to chat about this. Nolan, this story sounds straight out of a cyber thriller. China accusing the U.S. of quietly seizing $4 billion in Bitcoin. What's your first reaction to all of this?
You love when states come up with the hard reality, come against the hard reality. You hear in law, there's an expression in law that possession is 9/10 of the law, right? We hear that all the time. And that was pre-Bitcoin. But Bitcoin makes it more explicit. Possession is actually 10/10 of the law. So watching one state, hey, give me my Bitcoin, that's mine, and then another state who has taken it, and again, it's going to piss off people, and I'm one of those people that doesn't think the government should be able to seize Bitcoin this way. I think most of the Bitcoin that the U.S. government already has on its strategic reserve should go to Bitfinex and Tether. I don't understand why that conversation, there's obviously some form of commercial relationship now between Tether and the T-bill buying. So probably they're told to just forget about that and focus on making the fiat money for now and see where that goes. But nevertheless, watching people get angry about the government and get governments angry about the government and everyone seemingly impotent against, in this case, not state power. State never has that kind of power in general. But because it's holding Bitcoin, it really underlines the strength of Bitcoin and that it is a bearer instrument. It's one of the best features of Bitcoin. And so it's just reality. It's not a good moral question or a bad moral question or who deserves what or who gets what. The reality is the American government has it, and there's nothing the Chinese can do about it. There's nothing any one of these nation states. I mean, it's arguably the strongest or second strongest nation state in the world can do nothing about this. And that really underlines why we are in a completely different system with Bitcoin. So you gotta love the drama of people screaming against a wall of Bitcoin and understand that it really underlines why Bitcoin and the features of Bitcoin are so important to the financial system going forward, because we're going to see way more kleptocracy from governments going forward as they continue to deal with their balance sheets that are completely blown up from fiat, as we continue to move into a world of bimetallism, which is really where I think things are headed, where we've got two different currencies. We've got currency for consuming, currency for saving, and governments, fiat will get what it always asked for. Fiat wanted to be government decree money. Fiat means government decree. If you're going to make government decrees money, then eventually you're going to have pure policy money, and eventually it will be food stamps. So we're going to food stamp money and Bitcoin. And so seeing the government hoard and cherish the Bitcoin in this way shows Gresham's law in effect. Of course, Gresham's law being that the good money will drive out the bad. And so the bad money will be for Coca-Colas, and you're not going to see anyone fighting over Coca-Cola money to that extent. It's going to be over the Bitcoin. So the frame of all of this, we don't, the nation states in this are observers, participants and observers, but the actual main character of the story is Bitcoin, and it's the properties of Bitcoin that make it the protagonist in the story. The nation states are just along for the ride, including America and the seizure.
Yeah, no, this clearly to me falls under the statute of finders keepers. China is losing and weeping on this one. But it does kind of bring an interesting question here. So how do you think this kind of high stakes tug of war between superpowers affects the global perception of Bitcoin? Does it make it maybe seem riskier to some, or is this just making it seem more inevitable? Because if we have the two of the most powerful nations in the world fighting over Bitcoin, it certainly seems to signal that they find it to be a valuable asset, right?
Yeah, I agree with that exactly there, where it's about modeling behavior right now, right? Where with the saturation of media, with the saturation of nagging in media in particular, you gotta recycle more, and you gotta save your money, don't drink coffee, that's why you don't have a house. It's all nagging everywhere. And watching Bitcoin demonstrate this kind of power without speaking, by modeling people's desire for it, is a much more powerful message being sent. Watching the two strongest countries get into an arms race about Bitcoin, get into a soft war about who has possession and control of the Bitcoin, watching people try to weasel and squirm their way through fairness. Imagine arguing fairness against Bitcoin. It's insane. So it won't work. It won't change anyone's mind. And indeed, it does model the desirability of Bitcoin in a way that you wouldn't be able to conjure if it was just someone reading you a great poem and an ode to Bitcoin. Having a Bitcoiner tell you all about his love of Bitcoin is not nearly as persuasive as the two most powerful and important economies saying, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. And we can only hope they fight more about it, up until a point. We don't want the fighting going nuclear.
Right. Yeah, just a little bit of fighting.
We don't want to be, Then I've had enough, Then it's take the Bitcoin, don't nuke me. Speaking of blackmail.
We don't want things to do. Go ahead. Blackmail. Blackmailocracy. There you go. Yeah. And speaking of fighting, I want to talk about our next story here, because if we're talking international news, this cannot be ignored, as Russia says it's ready to resume peace talks with the Ukraine in Istanbul, of all places, because apparently nothing says end of war like a Turkish layover. Now, no face-to-face peace talks have happened since back in July, when delegations met in Istanbul for all of 40 minutes, roughly the length of one Netflix episode. The Ukrainian side reportedly suggested an August meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin. Putin said he was open to it, but only if Zelensky came to Moscow. Kiev shockingly said no, which makes sense since meeting Putin in Moscow sounds less like diplomacy and more like a true crime podcast. Now, Turkey has been pushing hard for both sides to resume negotiations, mostly because hosting global chaos is kind of their thing now. But as of today, Kiev continues to reject Moscow's narrative that Ukraine is to blame for the stalled peace progress. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, Russian says the ball is in Ukraine's court, which is ironic since they've spent the last 4 years blowing up every court in sight. Do you think this is genuine diplomacy or just Moscow trying to control the narrative again?
No, I think that they did have sensitive economic levers that Trump has stepped on, in particular India. And you've heard Besant a few times express that they will do more than just sanctioning. So what the Biden administration tried to do to get control of or at least change the factors on the ground and incentivize peace from the Russian end, was to really target banking and to really target those sectors. It was the US dollar seizure of reserves and then the sanctioning of Russia from the US-based US dollar financial system, as well as cutting off Nord Stream pipeline. Those three things they thought would be enough. It turned out that they were much more resilient in Russia than we had imagined, and they used the India case, which was they were selling oil to India, who was then flipping the oil back to Europe. So Europe was still buying the oil from Russia this whole time. So when Besant and Trump shut that down, now the thing about the physical nature of a pipeline is that you can't turn it on and off. It's not the same as your air conditioner, or it's not like water coming into your house. It's not that kind of a pipe. The pressure is required in it. Once you turn it off, it cannot be started again. It becomes garbage. So the oil has to flow. So I think Trump, last time, we didn't hear the details because it does get too much into the incentives and motivations, but it sounds like everyone came up with a plan to give Russia a little bit of grace when it came to negotiating, but I think the time is up now. And so if that actually happens, those are the types of economic issues that Russia will have trouble recovering from. And it gets better. It gets better. Both of them have been targeting each other, Ukraine and Russia, on the energy system level. So when I say that economic war is foundational for World War III, this is what I mean. It is an economic war. There's a hot war in Russia and Ukraine, so we get confused by that, but it is still an economic war. The targets are not necessarily the civilians. They're energy producing areas, because it really is about Russian. It always was about Russian oil, of course. And it continues to be about Russian oil. And so will Russia get to keep its oil? Will they get to keep its markets open? It looks like the deal that Trump has on offer for them is a no-brainer. They get to make all their money. They get to get the money back that's been seized, the 400 million or whatever billion US trash tokens that were taken by I don't know which central bank. All of that stuff can come back to them. They can open up their European markets again. They get to keep selling to China. They get to keep selling to India. And at a certain point, there is a threshold at which Russia is going to have to put aside its desire to fight, because I think Trump is right about that. It looks like these two groups really do hate each other, or at least Zelensky and Putin hate each other. I'm sure there's a lot of friendship between Russians and Ukrainians on a personal level. But at the level of leaders who are engaging in all this, it looks like they do hate each other. And it looks like the economic conditions may now be able to override the hate because things are reaching a certain level. So, in my opinion, it has always been an economic question. And it looks like whatever deal came about because of India will now have its ramifications in peace processes. I don't think Russia can afford the war any longer. Now, I'm not on the ground over there, but that's what I'm hearing and that's what it looks like.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And favorable terms for Russia from Trump seems convenient, but okay. And we're 4 years into the war currently. We've seen sanctions, energy shocks, and endless military spending have kind of reshaped global finance in a way since it began. So my question for you, Nolan, is like from a macro or Bitcoin lens, how has this conflict accelerated the move away from dollar dominance? Because I think those effects can't be ignored, right?
No, that's one of the big stories here, that the sovereign money wasn't sovereign, that it could have been taken in the first place was already shocking to the system, that those sovereign reserves were actually no different than like loyalty points, and that it was like, oh, I didn't know there were terms of service for sovereignty money. And so it shows that the sovereign money isn't sovereign if it's not yours. And it really does underline that Bitcoin exists in this framework outside of the state and money being combined. So having this potential, having the explicit case made before everybody that there's a reason why you'd want to separate money and state, because the actual threat vector is the state itself, you start to really underline why people would want to move towards this system. Now, it's done a lot as well in terms, the other big piece here is that the entire world once operated on a monopoly that the US government held over oil. So the only quotable price of oil in the world for many, many years was US dollar. The only market that conformed for oil and energy was the US dollar. That was the main part of the World War II consensus that came about. That's what made the dollar the supreme money of the world. Now, what's happened as a result of everything from the Joe Biden years in Ukraine and his inability to keep that coalition of US buyers together is it formed BRICS. And BRICS is Russia, India, China, Brazil, a few of these other places, and it grew. And even Saudi Arabia pulled itself out of the monopoly market for oil and Bitcoin. They started selling oil for other commodities. Now, before that happened and the Russian war happened, if you were Muammar Gaddafi, for example, in Libya, or you were Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and you said, I'm going to sell some oil for something besides dollars, you met a fate that involved hiding in a tunnel somewhere and getting dragged out and very violent stuff. Don't even go look at those videos online. They're disgusting. And so when you realize that the inability of the Biden administration to keep the coalition around the monopoly of the US dollar for oil markets 100% airtight is what allowed Russia to get around the financial sanctions. It used to be the sanctions were enough because of the monopoly of oil and dollars. Once Russia was able to leverage oil for other money, rupee, renminbi. Now in Shanghai, there is a huge market for oil and renminbi and yuan, Chinese money. So they've created huge liquid markets now for oil, for something besides the US dollar. Now, I don't believe BRICS has legs. That dog ain't going to hunt. No one's going to believe in a Chinese, Russian dollar oil price. It's going to be stupid. They say gold maybe, but even that's manipulated. So again, that's why Roxom exists. I mean, that's why the idea of Bitcoin for oil, that the only credible price for oil going forward will be Bitcoin, makes more sense than ever.
Right.
That's what the separation of money and state ends up looking like. In the end, the oil companies run the world, right? The oil companies are the most powerful, most important companies, or I should say energy companies. It used to be oil. They run the world. They use the nation state as a vehicle to move their interests. Whether Joe Biden wanted to take over Russian oil or Donald Trump wanted to take over Russian oil, in the end, they were getting provoked by U.S. energy companies who need to expand. All businesses need to expand. And the Middle East, there's enough expansion there. It costs a lot of money. It was a problem. You look at Russia, it's a huge market. The Nord Stream pipeline, it doesn't matter who exactly did it. In the end, American energy companies made money off it because they backstopped the loss of capacity from Nord Stream to Germany, and they supplied all the oil to Germany. That's why you saw all these messages in America about your natural gas oven is going to kill you. It's going to poison you at night. It's because all of a sudden the price had spiked and people were looking for alternatives. So people were like, let me get rid of this gas oven in the house because now my natural gas is too expensive, because they were selling it all to Europe. That's what caused the price to go absolutely apeshit. So the truth is, there's always going to be this opportunity for energy companies to try and leverage whatever they can to run the world. And they're the most vital companies in the world. They exist beyond those consumption habits I meant about Bernays. You need the oil no matter what. It has nothing to do with brainwashing. You need energy. You don't got to be convinced like the cigarettes to get more oil. You need it. If you're going to build, if you're going to manufacture, if you're going to move, energy is everything. Energy is the main vital cog in the economy. Energy companies run the country, whether we like it or not, they do. And the truth is, if the state is no longer the vehicle for them to exercise their imperial desires over the world because it's ineffective, then that's how you get to the separation of money and state. If the energy companies realize that the government printed money is not going to help them keep their control over the world, then they're going to have to find something else. And just like Bitcoin went into Wall Street and infected the psychology of Wall Street, got Wall Street trading a thing that will limit their potential growth in the future. But all Bitcoin had to do was infect their own self-interest to get them all motivated to bring about a Bitcoin standard in the world. And that's why you see Bitcoin so powerful on Wall Street. The same thing can happen in the energy industry. As Bitcoin moves into the energy industry, I expect it to infect the minds of those people in the same way that it did Wall Street. And if it helps them stay powerful, they're going to love it. If it helps them make predictable business decisions in the future to keep their pole position, they will do it. It has everything to do with the cost of violence changing simultaneous. It has everything to do with people like Palmer Luckey being more important for the energy industry than the US military. We're headed back to a world of pirates. We're headed back to a world of mercantile warlord type folks that are going to go in and control assets at a rate that we're not used to. And so Palmer Luckey and these other people would be examples of that, but it just shows that energy companies being so powerful will side with whatever system gives them the most sway, and it's going to be Bitcoin. So the nation states have made it too complicated.
Yeah, and energy, consumption right now is more important than ever with obviously Bitcoin mining facilities. We have AI, which is just sucking up all the available energy anywhere. But it makes, I think it kind of helps build the case for Bitcoin. This is the hardest asset that is literally created using energy, right? And if it's the most important thing right now, and it certainly seems like it is, then that should probably be reflected in our currency in some way, and Bitcoin does that. So that's exciting stuff. And we got one more story here, Nolan, and we're going to get you out of here. So hang 10. All right, here we go. A woman accused of turning Chinese retiree savings into one of the biggest Bitcoin hoards on earth has been sentenced in London to 11 years and 8 months for money laundering. Prosecutors say that Xin Zimin convinced over 100,000 Chinese investors to fund her company, Latian Guri, which claimed to mine Bitcoin and build infrastructure or futuristic health devices, but instead funneled their cash into her personal crypto crypto stash. Now, when police in China began investigating back in 2017, she slipped into the UK on a fake passport, rented a £17,000 a month mansion, and began living the get rich while lying down lifestyle she sold to her investors. She posed as an antiques and diamond heiress, hiring a former takeaway worker to help convert her Bitcoin into cash and property. Now, as Bitcoin's price exploded, Qian reportedly spent her days gaming, shopping online, and plotting in her diary of how she was going to found a bank and buy a Swedish castle and become queen of Liberland, a made-up microstate on the Danube. Her downfall came when she tried to buy a massive property in Totteridge Common. Her assistant couldn't explain the source of funds, prompting a Met police raid that uncovered her laptops and hard drives packed with tens of thousands of Bitcoin, the largest crypto seizure in UK history. Investigators say her company ran a Ponzi scheme worth more than 40 billion won, that's about 4.2 billion pounds, paying her early investors with new deposits instead of mining profits. Now, when Chinese authorities launched a probe, payouts stopped, but company managers reassured investors that it was temporary, likely because Qian had paid them off before fleeing. Arrested in New York in 2023, she first claimed political persecution before pleading guilty to laundering the stolen funds. Her lawyer now calls her a Bitcoin pioneer who never set out to commit fraud, which is a generous description for someone hoarding billions in stolen pensions. The Bitcoin she moved to the UK has since skyrocketed more than 20-fold in value. A civil case next year will determine whether the proceeds go to victims or the UK Treasury. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, the so-called crypto queen turned retirees' life savings into one of the biggest Bitcoin hoards ever. What does this case tell us about how early greed still defines the industry's public image? What do you think?
Well, I don't know about public image, but what I think of as a lesson to Bitcoiners is stay humble and stack sats. Had she just stayed humble, she would be sitting on that stack and no one would have ever found it. It's the same thing that happened with the Bitfinex hack a couple of years ago. Remember that it was like two hipsters in Brooklyn that got the Bitfinex money and they lived sort of modestly for a little while. And the minute they started flipping with the money and spending it everywhere and using Bitcoin here and there and showing off, and that was the end of them. And that's where the US government got a lot of its stack. And so just like any other time, Bitcoiners, I think, right, you can definitely spend your Bitcoin for sure, but if it comes through these illicit means, the stay humble thing is more important than ever. She was caught through her own hubris, her own greed. And now people can say, you know, greed exists in Bitcoin. Of course it does. I mean, that's the number one thing that drives all kinds of people forward. Yet we hear all the time that Bitcoin changes you. So if you learn how to stack sats in an actual humble way, usually it changes your consumption habits exactly in line with what we were saying with earlier with Bernays and the smoking cigarettes. And most Bitcoiners end up realizing that they live pretty modest lifestyles. Not many of them are out there trying to leave the shopping mall with 1 million bags. I mean, I can't think of a single OG Bitcoiner that I know that has a huge stack that lives in that way. Bitcoiners, of course, the nature of Bitcoin, because you can, you know, it's a bearer instrument. We always have to worry about the wrench attacks. It's not the same as wealth that came in the fiat world that was all in a stock market and you can't really rob the person. In Bitcoin, you really can, right? Most of the Bitcoin is in the heads of people and the wrench attack is a real thing. You know, I remember someone saying that when you understand the power of the wrench attack, I remember in the early days with Vitalik and someone said, well, you know how I can hack Ethereum? And he just said a car with a big trunk and a wrench. And I had never heard that before. And I said, wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. You could actually hack Ethereum with a car, a trunk, and a wrench. And that was before I even knew the concept of wrench attacks. And so now that we're at this point in this game and you realize just how important living under the radar is, staying humble is, in the environment that we're in the lack of personal security, which already exists even in America, you realize why the Bitcoin meme of staying humble can save your life and keep your stack. And whether you got it through legitimate means or you were a Chinese pioneer, as they call her, if you were a Chinese pioneer, Bitcoin pioneer, well, she would have been better off staying humble and wouldn't have had any of this trouble.
Yeah, it was a real rookie mistake. If you watch like any movie with guys like this, like The Accountant or something, they always live really humbly, even though they've got this big stack in the background. And again, rookie mistake, lady. Last question for today, Nolan. This kind of brings up an interesting thought, right? Like governments, when governments seize massive crypto holdings from criminals like we've seen here, do you feel like that ultimately makes Bitcoin look stronger, or does it maybe give regulators more ammo to tighten control on things? Where do you sit on that?
No, I think anytime you're modeling desirability and value and that people want it, they don't, I don't think people psychologically differentiate an institution from an individual in that instance. The direction is desire, the direction is wanting, it's coveting, it is all of those things that perpetuate Bitcoin. And Bitcoin does exist in the human mind. It's a psychological commodity. Its value, people say there's no intrinsic value. Well, you got the thing, we understand the math, it's solid, and then the energy backed by, but it's true. The intrinsic value is that we all value it, that we all want it. And now we want it because of the math and the mining and the energy and the proof of work and all that stuff. But again, I bring it back to Bitcoin changes you, and Bitcoin definitely orients people to want and fear different things, even that we were talking about at the beginning with fear, right? The different fear factors that are there. These things are subconscious, and people are not really rational. People don't go around. If people were rational, we'd be living on a Bitcoin standard already. The
Right.
barrier to a Bitcoin standard is not IQ or access to information. It is how much people are willing to face this reality or not. And more people are having to face this reality, and people are changing, psychologically changing what they want and what they're afraid of. Bitcoiners want and fear different things from fiat people. And the status, if you saw on the whiteboard that I had on my show before, we talked about how fiat was all about, avoiding conflict and getting along and status. These are the things that you're afraid of losing in the fiat system. And Bitcoin is different. Bitcoiners are afraid of leaders. They're afraid of people who would suck your attention and divert your attention. They're particularly afraid of algorithmic intrusions on your attention. These are the main fears of Bitcoiners. So when you see a government desiring it, it just mimics and models, I think, what a lot of Bitcoiners already see. We're afraid of it as a public institution. It's a type of leadered group, so we don't like that. But again, it is just institutions moving into the Bitcoin world and seeing the world the same way Bitcoiners do, because Bitcoin is foundationally a worldview when it comes to these things.
Yeah, no, I think we're all starting to get those orange lenses on, one person at a time, and we certainly appreciate you and your efforts at helping, let everyone see the world in that orange lensed light that we all love so much, Nolan. So it's always a pleasure having you on the show, and we certainly thank you for your time today. And you, of course, have your own amazing show. So for those in our audience that might have tuned in late, didn't get a chance to see The Great Awakening, tell me, when can they go and where can they go to check out your show where you do deep dives and really kind of showcase the world through that Bitcoin lens that we always talk about? Where can we send them and where should they be?
We're daily right before you on RoxomTV. So if you're already here, just come here a little earlier and you'll see me from 9 to 11 a.m. Now, I try to embrace the talk radio aspect of the show. So I try to take live comments. So if you go to Bitcoin on Rumble, which is a Roxom TV channel, you can live comment on the show. That's the feed with a live comment. There is no Chiron. A bunch of people come and live comment. We get over 100 people there every morning, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 500, depending on how hot the Bitcoin stories are that day or whether or not Rumble kicks us up with the algorithm. But we have a great audience there. A bunch of diehards that come every single day, and we have a great time. We start every day with NPC news, so I try to take headlines and I try to not add any commentary. I just read them today. I'll give you guys a little taste before I leave of one that I had today. It was great. It was the money scarcity mindset in Canada apparently is hurting people's lives. They call it the money scarcity mindset. And they gave you all kinds of tips to get over money scarcity mindset. And they were pretty funny. So we read the NPC news and then we go through whatever I think is the stressful fiat collapse stories of the day. and I try to surface those, and we have a nice chat about them. And again, the format is very much talk radio, so I take live comments the whole time. I interact with the live comments, and we take the stories as they come every single day and have a good time.
Love it. Well, I'm sure I'm telling everyone, go check it out. You can become a Bauer listener and watcher yourself. It's an awesome program, and we certainly appreciate you lending your insights with us this morning, Nolan. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
See you tomorrow, Hank.
See you tomorrow, bud. All right, we're taking a quick break here at the Blockchain Report, but when we're back, we got more of today's top news stories, and we should be joined by a special guest who'll be reporting from the LABITCON conference that was in Buenos Aires. So that and much more coming up here on the Blockchain Report when we return. See you in a sec.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
All right, welcome back. And joining us today is one of our favorite friends of the program. Of course, we are talking about Fernando, the Bitcoin libertarian. Fernando, welcome back, my friend. How have you been? I know you've been traveling around the world. How's the globe-trotting been treating you?
Hello, how are you doing? I'm super fine here in Argentina in my mom's house. So enjoying my last days here, visiting friends, family, and after an amazing Bitcoin conference. So, and now I'm going, I have to fly to an event in the afternoon. So super good here. A little bit tired, but super good.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you, sticking it out with us and joining us today, because I know you've been all around the place, and we do want to hear about the Bitcoin conference in Buenos Aires. Like, what was the vibe like this year? Was it hopeful? Was it chaotic? Or was it just a sea of people arguing whether ordinals are art or spam? What was it like this year? And how was it different from the Bitcoin conference in Hong Kong you were at not too long ago?
Well, first of all, I want to say that this is my first time here in LABITCONF. LABITCONF is the oldest Bitcoin conference now, not the one of the first ones, but it's the oldest that is still running. It's been since 2013, and to be honest, my expectations were surpassed. I was expecting something, and to be honest, the experience was amazing. First of all, the aesthetic of the conference was amazing. It's very good. They call the experience for all the conference 2 days, but we have also another 2 extra days. That is the whole experience. The conference was super good. There was full of companies. There was 7 stages. And one of the things that I like, everyone that knows me and follow me on social media, on my YouTube account, they know that I'm a super Bitcoin maximalist. I don't like all the other coins, but to be honest, I think that the crypto space is a good way to onboard people that they don't understand. And this conference was, let's say, 80% Bitcoin related topics. And the other 20%, they were talking about other coins, other chains, and to onboard people. And you can find, the good is like, I don't know if in United States, the buffet, it's like a food buffet where you can go and find whatever you want. This conference was like a Bitcoin buffet conference. You can go to attend to topics that were being talked by traders, very good traders in Argentina. Then if you want to go more maximalist content, you go to some stages where there were a lot of debates talking about Bitcoin, talking about the money and state. There was a small debate between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash that was not planned, but was a small debate. Then you have stages where you can find some builders building applications on Bitcoin and also in other stages. I met, there was an amazing place for like the VIP or the business stage that was with food and nice place to stay. In fact, I met there Nolan, and I was substitute. He was about to go into a show, but he was about to go to speak. So I took his place in the Bitcoin podcast with Walker America. Again, to be honest, this conference was much more than I was expected, and I'm sure I will be here next year.
Amazing, amazing. And I'd be curious, Argentina in and of itself is one of the most inflation-ravaged economies on the planet right now. So I'd be curious, how did that reality shape the tone of the conference compared to maybe other events that you've gone to? Because what Bitcoin means to Argentinians, for instance, is very different than what Bitcoin means to us as Americans. Did you feel that reflected in the tone of the conference at all?
Well, yes. First of all, I didn't have so much time to attend to different talks because I was speaking. The first day, I was in 3 different panels, and I was also creating content for my channel. Then the second day, I was doing interviews in the booth of the Bitcoin Organization of Argentina. They have this amazing band that is called LABITCONF. It is a band all plotted with Bitcoin, and I was doing interviews inside the band. But yes, most of the things that I don't know if the inflation was the main topic, because now inflation in Argentina is going down. I think that most of the people were interested in trading, in to see how they can make money on Bitcoin, because you know that Latin America and South America, you cannot plan in. For example, when we talk about Bitcoin in the main countries, we can say, okay, you need to hold Bitcoin for 5 years, 10 years, make a long-term plan. Here is totally different. In Argentina, a long-term plan is 6 months. So most of the people were interested in trading. But again, also there were some talks talking about how Bitcoin can beat the inflation. And this is something that made Argentina one of the early adopters of this technology. And there are a lot of interesting people building a lot of things in Bitcoin that are Argentinians. In fact, the founders of Roxom are from Argentina, because we are accustomed to deal with inflation, to deal with money control, with problems with sending money in and out of Argentina. So I think that all of these triggers this need for people to understand Bitcoin, understand another way to move away from the regulations of the country. But yeah, that was a lot of topics that been taught in the conference.
Yeah, and I'd be curious too. This has been a unique bull run, right? The last year, we expected October. We got the opposite of that. Right now, we're sitting around 100, 203K. We have some people with price predictions in the several hundred thousands by the end of the year. So with that in mind, and given that we really haven't met, I think, some of the expectations people had for this particular cycle, specifically price-wise with Bitcoin, give us a sense of the kind of energy among the Bitcoiners there. Did it feel like a bull market celebration, a disappointment, or was it more like a movement re-energizing the Bitcoiners for the next phase of adoption? What was kind of the sense that you were getting from being there amongst the masses?
Interesting question. Yeah, from the masses, I think that I saw the people that was very, very, very excited, because probably most of the people that were attending, they are not hardcore Bitcoiners or people that is inside with a lot of money. So the vibes were super good. People were having fun. In fact, there were many different booths of big companies like Binance or Binx that they were organizing some kind of games with football or something like that. I think that the general vibe was excitement, people discovering something new, people trying to learn, people trying to meet Bitcoiners or probably meet the main, here in Argentina, the main people on the scene are mostly traders, and they were trying to meet the traders and see what they were talking about. On the sentiment of the speakers, especially these guys, the high-profile guys from Argentina that are mostly traders, the sentiment was not so bullish. Most of them were talking about Bitcoin at 60K for next year. They were talking about an upcoming bear market that I don't agree. So to be honest, I don't agree with that. I think that all of them are based in, I don't want to say wrong, because no one knows who is wrong or who is right until things happen. So even though I disagree with them, I respect their trajectory, I respect their audience, but I think that most of the people in the Bitcoin space is still thinking or are still thinking that we are following these 4-year cycles after the halving, a couple of days, reaching the top, and then a bear market with like probably 80% price retraction. Probably they say, okay, this time we are not going to have 80%, but we can have 50% or something like that. I do think that the bear market is this year. This year we are seeing a bear market. And I think that we saw, because this year, if we point today's 101.5, the price of Bitcoin, that mostly is the same price from the beginning of the year. And I cannot understand why Bitcoin didn't went up for more, because all the models say that we must go up. I think that this sentiment, I think that there is a sentiment that people thought that Bitcoin was going to be probably 200K, 300K, but this time of the year. And as we are reaching, we don't reach these levels, people is like disappointed. But to be honest, for me, moving Bitcoin in this direction, in this side direction, with probably flat for the full year. Of course, we had 126 a couple of, probably 1 month ago, or we had 65K in April, but we moved sideways for the big part of the year. I think that this probably can be the bottom, and this can be the bear year, and probably next year we can see a Bitcoin price pumping up. But again, I don't agree with what they say, that we are going to face a bear market, because again, they are thinking in a different, they are still thinking in the cycle of the past, and this cycle, if we can call this a cycle, is totally different than the past, because we reach an all-time high just before the halving. We have the ETF, we have the Bitcoin treasury companies, we have Bitcoin lending, we have more people into the space that understand more how Bitcoin works, and they are not here for short-term gains. They are here for long time. They are here for what Bitcoin means. So I think that what they think, they do a good analysis, but based from I don't want to say wrong, but a starting point that is not going to be the same this time.
Yeah, no, this whole year has been kind of its own beast in a way I don't think any of us really anticipated, for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, we have all this seemingly great narratives that are surrounding Bitcoin. We have all these new products being built. We have nation states seemingly interested in putting it on their reserves actively. We have institutional accumulation in a way we had never seen before. Yet the price does seem like a bit of a letdown this year, but I feel like most of that's probably due to a lot of this macro noise that we're seeing, in addition to, and this can't be ignored either, the AI boom that we've seen over the last year or two. And you got to imagine imagine a lot of that liquidity that's going into this AI bubble that we're seeing now might have funneled its way into Bitcoin instead, but AI is kind of the new pretty girl on the block, and everybody's got their attention laser focused on that. But as we're seeing right now, that looks like that's going to be at least some kind of bubble that will be popping in the not too distant future, but it's certainly having its effect on the Bitcoin price, which is kind of putting everybody in a weird spot. And that question as to whether the 4-year cycle will still be a thing has kind of been on everybody's mind this year. And I would have to agree with you. We are fundamentally in a different place than we ever were in previous cycles. So I think it's a long drawn out up and to the right as opposed to these parabolic rallies we've seen of yesteryear. We're just in a different place right now. And back to the conference, Fernando. You know, one of the big things that are the big draws of these conferences are some of the speakers. I know at the Vegas conference, for instance, this year we had Vice President Just Dance Vance was in attendance. I think Eric Trump spoke. Who are some of the interesting people or speakers that you saw or met at the conference that might have stood out to you this year?
Well, first of all, myself. No kidding. No kidding. Well, there was here, even though they didn't come many high-profile speakers from the English-speaking world, besides Efract Fenningston, Nick Spanos, and other guys from Trezor or Tenets Capital. There, all the royalty, all the big names in the Spanish community were here at LABITCONF. Again, also, there were the big names in the Bitcoin space, like, for example, Luna. Luna is one of the, I call him the Messi of Bitcoin because he is the biggest voice among the Bitcoin maximalists. He's a really huge Bitcoin advocate from Spain. He has educational content that is amazingly produced with aesthetic that is amazing. Of course, it's not easy to understand what he says for newbies, but he's an amazing mind. Then there was Adrián Bernabeu, there was Álvaro Di María. From the Argentinian side, we had Carlos Maslatón speaking about Bitcoin treasury companies. There was other big names, like there is a guy called Crypto Norbert that he is a successful trader that lives in Miami, but he's also a Bitcoin maxi. He has a miner company, and there was many other names that are very well known in social media. Of course, there were no so many people from the government side, like probably from the maybe we didn't see like the president or the vice president or some top figures of the government of Argentina. But again, all the big names in the Spanish-speaking community were here. I love speaking with Luna. I was honored to be in the same panel with Luna, Adrián Bernabeu, Álvaro Di María, Lore Bitcoin, that is a Bitcoiner from Mexico, a very, very huge advocate from Bitcoin, and also again Carlos Maslatón was here. Also Borja was here talking in a panel. Again, I think that compared with other Bitcoin conference, the quality of this conference was amazing with the speakers. Again, even though there were not many speakers in English speaking language, there were a lot of huge speakers in Spanish. And this is good because in Argentina, even though we have a huge speaking English community as a second language, we are not, when we live here, we are not so forced, or we don't speak too much English, or we don't consume too many content in English. That's why it was good that the top people of the Spanish speaking was here. And again, Efrat Fenningston, Nick Spanos was here. Good lineup of speakers.
That does sound like a good lineup of speakers. And we actually have some big news coming from the Speaker of the House here in the United States that we want to turn to in just a second. So hang tight there, Fernando. We're going to take a quick break. But when we're back, we're going to announce this breaking news, and you and I are going to chat about it. Sound good?
Okay, excellent.
All right, we'll be right back with the Blockchain Report and this breaking news right after this quick break. All right, and we're back with some breaking news. House Speaker Mike Johnson just spoke with reporters at the Capitol saying, "We believe the long national nightmare will be over tonight." The House is expected to vote on the funding bill around 7 p.m. EST. That's 4 p.m. Pacific time. So, Fernando, let's bring you back here. I want to chat about this. After 40-something odd days, it looks like the government shutdown here in the United States is finally coming to an end. What do you make of this? Is this just lawmakers who are finally ready to start collecting their paychecks again? Is this kind of an example of everything that's wrong right now with our government? Like, we've been held hostage for 42 days now. Like, what do you make of this? Is this bullish news going forward?
Well, I have to study a little bit about that, because Argentina, I know that it happens when the budget is not approved in United States. Here in Argentina, we've been without budget approved for like the last 2 years and a half. So for me, it's a little bit crazy that they shut down. But again, everything that can bring the government function to normal things, if the government come back, I was talking the other day with a guy that came from Miami to the conference, and he was saying that the flights were canceled because of the shutdown of the government. There were not so many like these guys, the controllers and all the stuff, for again all the things that can bring the government back and to normal rails, with no shutdown, with no crazy thing. I think that all of these things are bullish. I need to understand a little bit how it works, because here in Argentina we don't do these things. But again, coming back to normal things, government functioning 100%, economy coming back to the normal rails, is a bullish sign for Bitcoin and for the markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's one of those kind of weird situations where I think the clear signs we're seeing of government dysfunction are ultimately bullish for Bitcoin long term, but in the short term right now, I don't think it's going to be bullish for the price, but it's these instances of dysfunction that get people to kind of perk up and realize, like, this really isn't working. There's got to be a better way, and that's when I see people's attentions turn to Bitcoin as that alternative escape hatch for this myriad of dysfunction we're constantly seeing here in our central government. So long term, I think it's I definitely think it's bullish for Bitcoin, but short term, the chaos obviously has had its effects on the prices, a lot of these macro events we've been seeing as of late. So I do think it's a win long term, and thank the good Lord Satoshi, because I'll tell you, the flight grid here has been all messed up. Flights are delayed all the time. I can't live like this. So I'm glad it's finally up and over. And we're certainly glad that we have had the opportunity to chat with you today, Fernando. It's always a blast having you on the show, and you have your own amazing podcast. So for all of our audience out there that isn't already tuning in, when can they find it? Where should they go? Where can I send them so they can see more of your work?
Well, they can see our podcast in English in Libertarian BTC, our podcast in Spanish, that is the one that we are working most, but now we are going to come back to the English side with more content. Our podcast in Spanish is Libertarian BTC ESP. On the other side, they can follow us on X, the Bitcoin _ in English, the Bitcoin ESP _ in English, in Spanish, and the Bitcoin Libertarian is our Instagram, so they can stay tuned of all our activities over there.
I love it. And we love having you here on the show, Fernando. So really appreciate you joining us from being on the road for the last couple of weeks as you've been. And I hope you safe travels on the rest of your journey. And we're looking forward to having you back on the program real soon.
Yes, I'm flying back to Hong Kong on Sunday. So next time I will be back in my normal site, and I will be back to Hong Kong. But yeah, it's been a wild month traveling around, but amazing, because I mixed a Bitcoin with visiting my family, visiting friends, enjoying my country. And I'm super happy that this happened, but it's time to go back home to continue working.
Well, we're sending you good and safe and on-time flight vibes for your trip. Hopefully no delays. And we'll see you next time, hopefully sometime next week, to talk more shop. Fernando, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be in your show and in RoxomTV.
Pleasure's all ours. We'll see you soon, Fernando. And we're going to take a quick break here at the Blockchain Report, but when we're back, we got more of today's top stories, and we're going to be going over the charts to tell you what you can expect from Bitcoin's price as we move in through this very pivotal Q4. Where are we going to land at the end of the year? We're going to talk more about it when we return here on the Blockchain Report. Stay tuned. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am, and the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. All right, it's time for our Bitcoin market rundown. Let's see how things are shaking out today. Remember, we just got news that it looks like the government shutdown here in the good old US of A is coming to an end, and Bitcoin's price hasn't really moved much as a result of that noise. In fact, we're actually down about 1.5% the last 24 hours, currently sitting right below that 102K mark. And I want to break down what we're actually seeing here in the charts with our section called Bitcoin Alpha, okay? This is where we look to the data so that you don't have to pretend to understand the charts, okay? So let's bring up the charts here and take a look. Bitcoin is currently sitting around 102K, which means that the bears right now are starting to get a little noisy, and the bulls, well, they're getting a little quiet, and everyone else is just kind of figuring out if this is a dip or the start of a next Netflix docuseries. So let's dive into the on-chain charts that actually tell us what's happening, or at least what people think is happening. All right, so this first chart we have up here is the MVRV ratio momentum. All right, so what this one does is it compares Bitcoin's market value to its realized value. So basically, it's a fancy way of saying how profitable are most holders right now. Now, when the green area we see here, okay, rises above zero. So see these little green areas over here, right? Here. When it rises above zero, it means that investors are making money fast, all right? But when it dips in the red, so you see the red here and here and here, it means that things are cooling off and traders are crying into their ledger wallets, all right? So what we're looking at here is on the right side where these circles are, okay? Right there, we've been in some negative momentum lately, as you can see, which tracks because price has pulled back hard from that 126K high we saw just about a month ago. But if you look closer, okay, these past dips that we're seeing, right, those past dips marked local bottoms before some huge reversals. And you can see we get reversals here, we got huge reversals. So if history rhymes, and in Bitcoin it often does, this level could be constructive for bulls. So we could see some more upside momentum in the not too distant future. Now momentum is a little weak right now, yes, but this is the same kind of week that tends to that comes before a big bounce that we've seen before. Remember here, not there, here. So hopefully we'll get some new big bounce in the not too distant future. Let's go to chart number 2 here, guys. This is the short-term holder supply in loss. What this one is it basically tells us how much Bitcoin bought in the last 155 days is now underwater. Because when that pink shaded area that we're seeing here, the pink here, spikes, it means a lot of recent buyers are losing money. Okay, and typically that's when fear is maxed out and smart money starts shopping again. So let's pay attention here to these pink peaks that we're seeing right here. We got another one coming up over here. All right, this is where things are getting interesting. The pink area, which is supply and loss, is rising again. But so is that yellow area we're seeing here, which is the total short supply. Okay, you can see the yellow area here on this chart up there on this these lines, all right? So that combo usually doesn't happen. And in past bottoms, when lost supply spiked, total supply flattened or dropped, which means people stopped buying, okay? And currently, let's take a look at the overlap between the pink and yellow areas here, okay? Let's take a look. We see a lot of overlap here. We see that red line, or the pink line, we see the yellow line, okay? This time though, they both appear to be growing. All right, that means that investors are still buying even while they're down. It's kind of like everyone saying, yeah, I'm underwater right now, but I'll take another round. We'll see what happens. It's either incredibly bullish moving forward or a collective lesson in emotional damage. If we do see another flush lower, say toward that, 98K mark, that could be the capitulation that we've been waiting for. Now, until then, this is an early signal that conviction is still strong, even through some of this pain that we've been experiencing as of late. All right, so let's bring up chart 3. This is our last one. This is the Bitcoin Cycle Extreme Oscillators chart. This metric tracks 8 different on-chain signals, kind of like the crypto equivalent of a health check. It flashes warm when 4 out of 8 are overheated, and overheated when 6 or more go full sauna mode on us, okay? So what we're looking at right now are these overheated spikes that we saw in 2017, all right, and 2020 and 2017, all right? So let's take a look at these overheated spikes we're seeing. So I think that's like here and here, right? See those? Those were peak FOMO zones. Basically, your Uber drivers asking about altcoin signal. This is when you want to look out for. Now, if we look at the right side of the chart, notice how we haven't seen warm or overheated trigger since back in 2024, okay? We're not seeing any peaks here, right? We saw these big ones here and here. Nothing. Even after 2 more local tops. So that's a rare thing here. It means that this market hasn't gone full euphoric yet. Or in other words, we're nowhere near the blow-off top phase that usually kills the party. So no, the bear market hasn't started yet. It's more like the pregame is still going on and half the room hasn't even shown up to the party as of late. So what are the big takeaways that we're seeing from all of these 3 charts collectively, right? Well, we're seeing signs of a potential bottom formation. Coins are shifting from weak to strong hands, cost basis is climbing, and metrics are stabilizing. Now that said, funding rates and realized profit levels are still elevated, meaning we could absolutely get another leg down before things turned up again. Now, with the government likely reopening soon and macro winds changing, things can definitely move fast, but the lesson here is that you need to have patience. Patience is the name of the game, because bottoms, they don't ring a bell for you, they just quietly transfer wealth to people who can wait. All right, so that's our Bitcoin Alpha segment for today. We're going to take a quick break, but when we're back, we're going to wrap things up with a little bullish, bearish, or BS here on the blockchain report, and we'll call it a Wednesday. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more after this quick message. All right, before we wrap things up today, we have one more story that's so delicious, we just couldn't wait to talk about it, because apparently the new macro indicator that everyone cares about is not the Fed or CPI, it's actually a saucy pork sandwich from McDonald's. The McRib is returning to menus everywhere, and some Bitcoiners are fired up because its past comebacks have lined up suspiciously well with big Bitcoin moves. Now, McDonald's marketing director even pointed out that Bitcoin and the S&P 500 tended to perform well after the McRib returned in 2017, 2020, and 2021, and then when it came back again in December of 2024, Bitcoin soon hit new all-time highs. So the proof is there. Now, the McRib is coming back for another a limited run, the same boneless barbecue pork, onions, and pickles Americans have been weirdly obsessed with. Now, if Bitcoin rips higher again, expect timelines full of charts proving that the sandwich is the real FOMC. Now, if it does nothing, well, at least everyone can drown their unrealized losses in limited time barbecue sauce. Yum. We're taking a quick break, but when we're back, bullish, bearish, BS, let's wrap up today's show, and we'll be doing that right after this. Wish you could grab cash without selling your Bitcoin? Yeah, same. But hey, that's why Ledin exists. They're the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans. We're talking over $9 billion issued since 2018 with a perfect record protecting client assets. Now, you might be asking, what makes a Ledin loan different? Well, with custodied loans, your collateral stays put. They don't go degen and lend it out for yield. There are no credit checks. It funds in under 6 hours, no monthly payments. You can repay anytime with 0 penalties. And for transparency that grown-ups actually want, proof of reserves reports every 6 months verified by a top accounting firm. The bottom line here, gang, is Ledin lets Bitcoin holders unlock liquidity without selling. You can check it out over at ledin.io/RoxomTV. That's LEDN.io/RoxomTV. right, boys and girls, it's time to wrap up this Wednesday with a little bullish, bearish, and BS. This is where we see if things are looking good or bad for Bitcoin going forward based on today's top stories. And remember, this is not financial advice. It's just a reminder that sometimes the crypto market runs on logic and sometimes it runs on memes and barbecue sauce. Let's get into it. First up, a 4-year-old Bitcoin hack that drained 127,000 BTC from Chinese mining pool LABITCONF has suddenly turned into a diplomatic blame game. China claims the U.S. government secretly took control of the stolen coins years ago, while the DOJ insists it was all part of a legitimate seizure. Now those wallets are moving again, with billions in Bitcoin sloshing between sanctioned addresses like it's the world's most passive-aggressive ping pong match. So my diagnosis on this one, I'm calling bullish, okay? But why? Well, because regardless of who hacked whom, the U.S. government now holds billions in Bitcoin, and that's quietly turning sovereign states into hodlers. The longer they hold those coins off the market, the tighter the supply continues to get, and the more Bitcoin starts looking like digital gold 2.0. If the world's superpowers are arguing over who owns the Bitcoin, that's a pretty clear sign everyone agrees that it's valuable. So governments fighting over BTC is the ultimate validation. It's not going away. In fact, it's getting political, so I'm calling bullish. Next up, Kian Zemin, the self-proclaimed crypto queen, has been sentenced in London to nearly 12 years for laundering billions stolen from Chinese retirees. She built a fake Bitcoin mining empire, scammed 100,000 people, fled to the UK on a fake passport, and lived like a Bond villain with Wi-Fi until the cops kicked in her door. Authorities seized tens of thousands of Bitcoin, now worth billions of dollars, and a court will decide whether the victims or the British government get the prize. I'm calling bullish on this one too, because as ugly as this story is, it's another step toward Bitcoin's legitimacy. Law enforcement is getting better at tracking, seizing, and prosecuting crypto crime, and the more regulators clean out bad actors, the safer the ecosystem becomes for real investors, institutions, and long-term adoption. It's like Bitcoin's immune system. Every scam that gets shut down makes the network stronger and the price more resilient. So cleaning out the scammers clears the runway for the next bull run. So I'm feeling bullish about that one, baby. So 2 bullish, 0 BS, 0 bearish. Let's see if we can go for the clean sweep today. And lastly, the latest macro indicator that everyone seems to be tracking is the barbecue sandwich from McDonald's, as the McRib is back on menus, and some traders swear its return has historically lined up with Bitcoin rallies in 2017, 2020, 2021, and 2024. Now, McDonald's even leaned into the meme, saying that the McRib has found new meaning in the crypto community. Ooh, I want to say bullish on this because it's so delicious, but I'm going to call BS, all right? Because let's be real, the McRib isn't moving markets, but it's a great reminder that memes, timing, and retail sentiment can create self-fulfilling narratives in the crypto space. So if everyone starts joking that McRib is bullish for Bitcoin, the irony alone could spark a FOMO pump. We've seen other weirder things happen before, but it's not because of the pork, it's because people are, well, predictable. Still, this is barbecue-based hopium at its best and tastiest, but it's definitely not any kind of trading strategy. So the McRib can't move markets, but it might move memes, which in crypto is often dangerously close. So today's scorecard, let's recap. We got 1 bullish, 2 bullish, and 1 BS. So today's final score is 2 bullish, 1 BS, which means today's market mood is officially bullish, and I feel like it's been a while, but we're also getting a side of skepticism with that, of course, because between governments hoarding Bitcoin, scammers getting shut down, and McDonald's accidentally becoming a crypto oracle, the trend is still leaning upward and to the right. So Bitcoin might not be ready to rip immediately, but the foundation underneath keeps getting stronger, and even the headlines are starting to sound like an adoption arc at this point. Well, gang, that is a wrap for our Wednesday edition of the Blockchain Report. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you haven't already, do us and yourself that small favor of hitting the like, subscribe, and follow button for RoxomTV, the Blockchain Report, and yours truly at Hank at RoxomTV on your platforms of choice. And we will be back same time, same place, same Bitcoin bedlam right here on the Blockchain Report the rest of the week. Remember, we start Tuesday through Fridays at 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for your weekly pleasure. But until then, gang, as always, please, please, please stay safe, stay informed, and always be sure to hodl on. I'll see you tomorrow.